In football, some men inherit glory, others walk straight into fire. In March 2021, Barcelona, once the beating heart of football, was barely breathing. The books were bleeding. The club was over $1.3 billion in debt. The wage bill was unsustainable. UEFA was circling. La Liga was enforcing. And the greatest player to ever wear their shirt was slipping through their fingers. Gone were the nights of tiki-taka and treble dreams. The stadium was silent. The fans were furious, and the boardroom was filled with empty chairs and blame. This was no club. It was a ruin, a ghost of what had once conquered Europe. And then he returned not as a savior, but as a man willing to face the storm, older, sharper, and far more aware of what it would take to resurrect the club again. He walked back into the presidency with no easy promises. There was no Messi to build around, no transfer budget to spend, no time to play politics, just chaos, deadlines, and a desperate need for leadership. But Laporta had one thing no one else did: memory. He had done this before. He had rebuilt once, and he believed it could be done again. Most men wouldn't step into a burning building. He walked in smiling, and what followed wasn't a miracle, it was a plan. This is the story of how John LAPORTA brought Barcelona back from the dead, not once, but twice. Before he resurrected Barcelona from financial ruin, John LAPORTA had already brought it back from despair once before. He was not born into football. He was a lawyer by trade, a politician by instinct, and a Catalan nationalist by conviction. With a law degree from the University of Barcelona and a successful legal firm under his belt, LAPORTA had built his reputation in courtrooms and campaign offices, not locker rooms. But he was also a lifelong socio, a fan, a member, a believer, and deep down he carried a vision that Barcelona could be more than a club. It could be a movement. In 2003, the club was directionless. Real Madrid were winning titles and stealing headlines. Barcelona hadn't won a major trophy in 4 years. The atmosphere was heavy with failure, and the fans had lost faith. Laporta wasn't the favorite to win the election. He wasn't the most experienced, but he was the boldest. His charisma turned heads. His promises stirred hope, and his audacious pledge to sign David Beckham, though never fulfilled, lit up the city. He won, unexpectedly, unapologetically, and from day one, he began changing everything. Frank Rijkaard was hired as head coach. Ronaldinho arrived soon after, the smiling Brazilian genius who would become the symbol of joy and revival. Laporta didn't just rebuild a team, he reshaped an identity. By 2008, Ronaldinho's magic was fading, Rijkaard was gone, and Barcelona stood at a crossroads again. Many expected a big-name coach to take the reins. Mourinho wanted the job. He even prepared a presentation, but Laporta chose a different path. He promoted a soft-spoken former midfielder with no first division experience, Pep Guardiola. It was more than a gamble, it was a revolution. Guardiola didn't just inherit a team, he created an orchestra. He benched Deco, he released Ronaldinho. He built the team around Xavi, Iniesta, and a 21-year-old named Lionel Messi, and the rest is football scripture. In just 4 seasons, Guardiola's Barcelona won 3 La Liga titles, the Champions League trophies, 2 Club World Cups, 14 major trophies in total. But more than trophies, they redefined how the world saw football. It was tiki-taka, it was total dominance, it was beauty with bloodlust, art with ruthlessness. It was the greatest club-side football had ever seen, and none of it happens without Laporta's trust in a young coach with a radical vision. That decision, to bet on a memory, a philosophy, a promise, remains Laporta's greatest legacy. It wasn't just bold, it was prophetic. When John Laporta left the presidency in 2010, Barcelona was on top of the world. Pep Guardiola had just delivered the most dominant football ever seen. The club was united, respected, and feared. But success can be fragile, and in the years that followed, cracks began to spread beneath the surface. Sandro Rosell took over, then Josep Maria Bartomeu. At first, it seemed like the train was still moving. Neymar arrived, Suarez followed. The MSN era was electric. Trophies were won, goals were flowing. But behind the scenes, the foundation was eroding. The club's identity was drifting. The boardroom became a battlefield. Transfers grew expensive and erratic. Neymar left for Paris in 2017, and the money from his sale was spent faster than it arrived. Over $400 million was spent on 3 players. None of them became the new Neymar. Meanwhile, the wage bill exploded, the squad aged, and a silent burden began to weigh heavier with each season. Lionel Messi's contract, the icon who had given everything to the club, had now become its most expensive dependency. Then came the pandemic. Revenues collapsed, fans disappeared, and the financial mismanagement of the past decade was exposed. closed. Barcelona was no longer just in trouble, it was on life support. By 2020, the situation was unsustainable. The club's debt had spiraled past $1.3 billion. La Liga imposed strict spending limits. Players were asked to take wage cuts. Internal documents leaked. Scandals surfaced. Messi, broken and disillusioned, asked to leave. Bartomeu refused, but the damage was done. In October 2020, Bartomeu resigned, facing a vote of no confidence, institutional chaos, and the wrath of millions. What was left behind wasn't just a wounded club, it was a smoldering ruin. And somewhere in the shadows, John LAPORTA was watching. He hadn't spoken much in years, but he had seen enough. The club he once rebuilt had fallen again, only this time the fall was deeper, the wreckage wider, and the clock was ticking. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He ran again. This time, there were no promises of superstars, no talk of dream signings, only one message: I've done this before, and I'll do it again. On March 7, 2021, John LAPORTA was re-elected as president of FC Barcelona. The club was on fire, but LAPORTA had never been afraid of flames. When John LAPORTA returned to FC Barcelona in 2021, there was one promise that hovered over everything: Lionel Messi would stay. It wasn't a campaign strategy, it was a belief shared by millions that somehow, some way, LAPORTA would find a solution. Because if anyone could keep Messi at the club, it was him. And for a few weeks, it looked like he would. Messi had agreed to a new deal. The fans were optimistic. Even Messi himself looked ready to write the final chapter of his career where it all began. But then came the numbers. La Liga's financial regulations hit harder than expected. The salary cap had dropped dramatically due to the club's enormous losses. Even with Messi's proposed pay cut, even with every backroom deal in motion, the math didn't work. Barcelona couldn't register his contract. LAPORTA faced an impossible choice: bend to a league that offered no leeway, or walk away from the greatest player in football history. He chose the club. On August 8, 2021, Lionel Messi said goodbye to Barcelona. There were no boos, no banners, just silence, then sobs. Children cried in the stands. Journalists wiped their eyes. Grown men hugged strangers. This wasn't just the end of a contract, it was the end of an era. And standing on the other side of it was John LAPORTA, the man who had promised hope and delivered heartbreak. Some called it betrayal, others called it bravery, because LAPORTA knew the truth. Keeping Messi would have meant sacrificing the future. It would have delayed the reckoning, not solved it. And for the first time in decades, he made the decision to put the institution before the idol. It hurt, it divided, but it was necessary. And behind closed doors, while the cameras moved on, LAPORTA began again. This time without the player who had defined everything. He didn't inherit a team, he inherited ashes. But sometimes to rebuild a dynasty, you have to let go of a god. With Messi gone and the club in financial ruins, John LAPORTA faced a question no president should ever have to answer. How do you rebuild a club that can't even afford to register a player? The answer? You gamble. He called them economic levers. To some, they were a masterstroke. To others, financial heresy. LAPORTA didn't just cut wages. He didn't just renegotiate contracts. He began selling parts of the club itself, one piece at a time. 49% of Barca Studios was sold. A chunk of future television rights was handed over to 6th Street. Additional commercial assets were mortgaged in exchange for immediate cash. The critics howled, "You're selling the future. This is reckless. This isn't sustainable." But LAPORTA didn't flinch. Within months, over $600 million had been injected into the club's bloodstream. The bleeding stopped, the register opened, and with money back on the table, LAPORTA moved fast. Robert Lewandowski, Rafinha, Jules Koundé, Christensen, Frank Kessié. It was Barcelona's most expensive transfer window in years, executed by a club that was supposed to be broke. And suddenly, a club that couldn't breathe started to roar. The squad was revitalized. The fans had hope again. La Liga took notice. Europe watched in disbelief. LAPORTA wasn't just making transfers, he was buying time, buying credibility, buying momentum. Every signature was a risk, every presentation a public bet, but it worked. Barcelona topped the table. They became the best defensive team in Europe. Sometimes to save the club you love, you have to break every rule you hate. And LAPORTA, once again, bet it all. And won when John LAPORTA let Lionel Messi walk. He didn't just lose a player, he lost a symbol. A living blueprint of what Barcelona once stood for. So he did the only thing that made sense. He brought back another one, Xavi Hernandez, midfield orchestrator, La Masia graduate, and disciple of Johan Cruyff, returned in November 2021, not as a legend, as a coach. At the time, the team sat 9th in La Liga. The football was dull, the belief gone. Xavi wasn't experienced. He wasn't a proven winner from the bench, but Laporta didn't need proof. He needed alignment. Xavi came not just to coach, but to restore. The passing, the pressing, the principles, everything that once made Barca. At first, results were shaky, but slowly, something began to shift. Teenagers were trusted. Veterans were reorganized. The team climbed from 9th to 4th, then from 4th to 2nd. By 2022, Barcelona were contenders again. And in May 2023, they lifted the La Liga trophy, their first without Messi in 4 years. Laporta had pulled the levers, and Barcelona had pulled themselves out of the grave. It wasn't clean, it wasn't elegant, but it was necessary. It wasn't just about winning La Liga, it was about winning with identity. Players like Pedri, Gavi, Araujo, Balde all took center stage. The core was young, the system was old, and it worked. Under Xavi, Barcelona became Europe's best defensive team. The goals weren't always flowing, but the control was back. The order, the unity, the Barca way. Laporta stood behind it all. Proud, patient, and relentless. He had hired a coach who spoke the same football dialect as the fans. A man raised in the DNA of the club, not just a manager, a messenger of memory. But football doesn't stop for sentiment, and Barcelona is a club that demands more. In the 2023-24 season, the cracks returned. The midfield struggled, Busquets was gone, results dipped, the magic faded, no trophies, no spark, and no patience. Laporta watched it all, quietly, carefully, because while Xavi had laid the foundation, something else was now needed. He had built the house, but Laporta was ready to bring in someone to electrify it. By the end of the 2023-24 season, the fairy tale had faded. Xavi Hernandez had given the club its soul back. He had trusted the youth, rebuilt the midfield, delivered a league title, but Barcelona demands trophies, not tributes. No Copa, no Champions League, no spark. For Laporta, that was enough. He thanked Xavi, hugged him, and closed the chapter. Then came the replacement. Not sentimental, not safe, strategic. Hansi Flick, a German tactician, ruthless in detail, obsessed with structure. A manager who didn't grow up in La Masia, but who knew exactly how to weaponize its potential. Laporta didn't hire a poet, he hired a mechanic, and the results were immediate. Every player leveled up. Koundé became a wall. Christensen returned sharper. Fermin Lopez became fearless. Pedri, finally fit, looked reborn, and Lamine Yamal, just a teenager, was now playing like a veteran. This wasn't a revolution, it was a recalibration. Xavi planted the seeds. Flick forced them to grow. Under Flick, Barcelona wasn't just playing better, they were playing like they believed they were the best team in the world. It wasn't just coaching, it was culture shock. The squad stopped relying on nostalgia. They started imposing authority. Press harder, think faster, win ugly if you must, but win. Laporta had made the switch. Barcelona was never just a football club, it was a symbol of identity, of pride, of power. And John LAPORTA was never just a president, he was its architect, its caretaker, its engine. Now, he's planning his final act. By 2024, the pieces are all moving into place. The Spotify Camp Nou, a €1 billion cathedral of football, is nearly complete. Not just a stadium, but a statement. A venue built for modern spectacle, global fans, and €1 billion nights. The Nike deal, just signed, is the largest in football history, $1.7 billion until 2038. 158 million arriving immediately. No penalties for poor sporting performance. No more desperation. Financial normality is no longer a dream. It's becoming reality. The youth pipeline is overflowing. Lamine Yamal, Pau Cubarsí, Fermin Lopez, Hector Fort. Teenagers playing like titans. The team is fast, young, hungry. The manager is ruthless. And the president, he's setting the stage. Laporta knows timing, and he's been saving one last move. For one last night, the reopening of the Spotify Camp Nou is more than an architectural unveiling. It's a coronation. Laporta wants a crown jewel, a statement signing, a name that echoes. Erling Haaland, Florian Wirtz, or Rafael Leao, a player who, according to sources, would say yes with his eyes closed. This isn't just about transfers, it's about timing, symbolism, power. Laporta doesn't want to leave the presidency with applause. He wants to leave with silence, the kind of silence that comes when something is done so perfectly, you don't know how to respond. He knows the next elections are coming, he knows the scrutiny will return, but here's the truth, he doesn't need to campaign. He doesn't need to convince. Barcelona today, financially stabilized, structurally modernized, and tactically revitalized, Laporta didn't just survive the storm, he built a kingdom in its aftermath, and now he's preparing to reopen its gates. With the whole world watching, John LAPORTA didn't just lead FC Barcelona, he rebuilt it. He stepped in when others stepped away. Once in 2003 when the club had lost its identity. Then again in 2021 when it had lost everything else. He let go of legends. He mortgaged assets. He made enemies. But he brought the club back to life. With memory, with money, with risk. He didn't win by being the loudest. He won by lasting. Now with a new stadium rising, a team reborn, and a final move on the horizon, Laporta's legacy is nearly complete. He was never just a president. He was the man who refused to let Barcelona die.